So, let's do that. Let's go back and cast your mind back to yesterday morning, first panel on the entrenchment of the neoliberal agenda. Jessica's had to do with Jose.
Yeah, I just got up some few words from Jessica who joined us at the round table. So I'm just going to read them. Basically, what she gave me was a number of questions that she considered central to that panel, and that hopefully will help us to basically, go back to them and try to lead them to the other debates that we have today. So basically, the questions were: can we expect everyone to be environmentalists? Do we see environmentalism of the poor in Europe? Can we expect it? Is there a useful separation between activism and academia? Or are these labels and roles divisive and in need of revision? How can activists and academics come together in meaningful ways, work together and be of use to each other? Do we need to be clear or careful regarding how neoliberalism is used? Is there a danger of invisibilizing actors and differences, as well as homogenizing experiences and overlooking successes? Is there a danger of pitching an unproblematic local good against a faceless global bad, mixing complexity, division and conflicts within what local groups want and how this is decided? Unexpected coalitions were mentioned, UKIP and Greens against HS2. Are these workable, sustainable, worrying? Many thanks for a great conference, I should say. That's brilliant.
Okay. I noticed you asked us lots of questions, and it's not here. Okay, thank you. Dan, can you say something about your recollection of panel 2? And it's really useful for people yesterday to remind us what we had yesterday.
Yes, I can. I'm going to take
Keeping local land grab.
I'm going to take a lead and ask a series of questions and then leave. But just to remind you, we had talks from Mira on rights to water, on Damien on fracking, Gabrielle on GMO, and Juana on cyanide and fracking, cyanide mining and fracking as well, and Costas about the golf course in Crete, and who have I missed off? Okay, and the common things, a couple of questions that I recall from that session, and I think also from the rest of that day, were basically what are the grounds of our opposition to what's going on? Is it that we're seeking a new framework by which people can access resources, for example, through rights to water? Is it that we hate the regulation of environmental control which is failing? And is that failing because profit is being extracted by capitalist forms of organisation and then distributed to shareholders when it could and should be put into environmental regulation? Or is it in fact the very nature of capitalist extraction which is the problem? Is the scope of our difficulty the fact that the way that politics is organised? This is Damien's slide showing the fact that politicians are too intimately connected with corporate lobbies. And then, given that these are the hegemonic forms of extracting profit and forms of causing environmental damage and harm, and personal harm, when Gabrielle's talk about GMOs, then, again, what are the most effective forms of resistance, but then what is the longer, bigger vision of resistance? I think the bigger vision of resistance would be what I was asking myself after having some more thoughts.
Okay, good, thank you very much. So, panel 3 is cashing in on protected natures. Dimitros.
Yeah. So, cashing on protected natures in the global north context, I think, was the full title, if I remember correct. And I think we had Katja about the critique on the science of complexity and its role in depoliticization of political issues, on the role of organization and state in disciplining the role of state and urbanization in disciplining and forming organizations, places and individuals the logic of capital and grand capital. you also had some attempts at the resolution of these contradictions, but using rights discourse and rights laws and so, but these two sort of rights discourses were also contradictory. We had rights of humans for nature by Friends of the Earth, like Sandra and Friedrich, which were about a human right to enjoy and benefit from nature, and then there was the right from UNTA, there was the rights of nature. There was a distinction there as an experiential and spiritual unity which could be sort of in a way inscribed in law. And what we saw, like there's diversity here, which sort of maybe is contradictory and conflicting and antinomic, but George, I think, hinted that a sort of theoretical, if not practical solution, the commonality within difference, that for like his research is characteristic of projects in the global north and the global south, and that links well with like by presentations from previous panel, like Network Against United Useless Imposed Mega Projects, or Ivan, I think, showed some photographs of attempts at scaling up, like resistance between sort of the KTVP anti-mining struggles and struggles against mining again in Romania. So my question is, the way I think the question that sort of remains is, and many panelists and people have talked about that, is what is to be done. Like that's a question I think that comes out of this conference. If we are to unite, so the theme of the conference, to unite scholars, political ecologists and activists. And like that's a question that remains, and if I can put it sort of in just a question, are there useful mega projects that we're interested in creating, and what institutions can sort of help us create these visions for the future, because mega projects are possibly part of the future, even if it's like socialist or communist, like Eric said.
Good. Thank you. Right. Panel 4, Esther, from rights to the city to rights to nature.
I thought one of the key resounding messages that came out of the panel this morning was around the global state, unpacking it, picking apart its role, what we mean by it, interfaces with it, and our expectations of it. And that kind of makes us recognise that our demands and how we see this is, of course, influenced by where we come from. So these conceptions of rights, rights to different qualities of life, very much influenced by the fact that the majority of us kind of become competing welfare states, which are not entirely accurate or furthermore historically accurate for the global south, so the global south. The second point I wanted to bring up was not only tied to my panel, but I thought was something that was kind of a little bit more generic that came through, was this idea of an ideas, theory, and practice. And such a exciting things for traveling audience. And this theory practice divide came through in a lot of ways in this Rights to City panel around the way that rights to water is realised in different parts of the world, how that's of course went into that context in South Africa, but also in terms of public-private partnerships, the role of the state and the community, public consultation processes and public participation, the way that worked out in Lambeth, the Mary's group. And as a slight provocation, I have also just made a note here to also think through the way that some of these travelling knowledges and ideas sometimes work within some communities and don't work within others. And I think that that's particularly relevant as we kind of look at the stagnation of the viral political left here in Britain and in Europe more generally. The third point was much more relevant to the panel, which was, of course, the urban natures theme, which I kind of felt we didn't unpack enough, because I think that's such a rich topic of research. And it's got so much scope, so I guess taking some of Alex's work forward a little bit, the linking of environmental footprint with infrastructures, the sources of water, so thinking outside the city and the way that the city is actually embedded in a much wider socio-ecological landscape in ways that we usually don't recognise and our imaginaries don't account for. I also think that I found enormous provocation in Elliot's presentation yesterday, and something that I think we should definitely take forward and unpack a little more, is the way that we kind of passively accept the forms and processes of urbanization today. A lot of them are very much unquestioned, these processes of city making and who has places in the cities, and the ways in which many people get left out of those processes. And I don't only mean within the city, but also the way that we don't seem to care so much about what happens in rural places, even though those rural spaces will always be incredibly important for the maintenance of the city. I had two other points, which were also just my general observations. I'll be very, very quick with them. My general, I guess, another provocation is that I think as a group, we need to be far more critical of what we mean by neoliberalism and neoliberalization. I noted in every panel almost these constant references to the way that things are neoliberal because they're privatized or they're undergoing processes of privatization, extractivism, marketization, financialization, and I would really strongly challenge actually a lot of that labeling as neoliberal. I don't think that necessarily that is historically warranted. Some of these processes have been kind of ongoing for a lot longer than the period we would literally call neoliberal and identify as neoliberal. And the very, very last one is a question of who are we as academics. It was touched on by Eric's presentation, which I thought was fantastic, so thank you. But I think that we're often not critical enough or self-reflective enough about our own role in shaping the ways for where our knowledges are used and what they're used for. And it's particularly dangerous, of course, in terms of considering ecosystem services and the MEA and the way that that's probably being the launch pad for biodiversity offsetting. And the IPBES project and everything that is currently ongoing around ecosystem services assessments. But I think that that's also, Evan's not here anymore either, but it was also touched on earlier in terms of being a little bit more reflective about whether we are kind of objective, no such thing, objective bystanders or enablers of these different processes that we're actually trying to be very critical about. Thanks.
Excellent, thank you very much. We'll give you one more set of ball in the air. We've got the last one, which is Lisa.
I think the value evaluation debate had an internal consistency. I was talking with Larry beforehand. I was like, well, we're talking about the same things and having different theoretical points to make. But I see that on the activist side, this is perceived as much less urgent. Because it's a technical debate in a way, and it has been phrased and packaged as a technical debate, while it's deeply, deeply political. And we see that in the global south, the resistance to ecosystem services, but also the failures of carbon trade are very evident. So the fundamental question that we were discussing today, should we appropriate valuation for a progressive end, it's actually perceived as a false dilemma. So there's a quite straightforward divide between social movements and academics in valuation of nature debates, which I think is less clear in other debates like the rights to city debate, the rights to nature debate. So this is my impression. I think I want to make an effort myself in what I see as a missing link in this debate. The missing link is a discussion of political agency. So we go back to a discussion of the state and what can we do within and beyond the state. What is the political agency that we are addressing, both as activists and academics? I was impressed by Daniel teaching us that by definition of the police in the UK, we're actually one group and not true. I didn't know this. So I think I've learned a lot, and I think that the other theoretical point that we were trying to make with the panel is we need to really understand what Morgan said. You're multiplying 10 times blue. And this is the fundamental, like the ontological violence, which exchange value imposes upon use values. We can say that way you're multiplying 10 times blue, which I find really much more effective. But the violence of abstraction is something that these horizontalist social movements are addressing in a way that does not then become intelligible for more organized political structures. And this is the dilemma we're facing. This is the dilemma we're facing. And I agree with David Harvey's 2014 stance on this. If horizontalist practices keep scaling down the movements, we are not going very far. And I want to say this today because it's a special day, I think. We've been protected in this keeping warm bubble, which I very much appreciated, but I know that political agency needs to be discussed more courageously. It's not easy. But I'd like to see this maybe as a threat for future engagements and discussions.
Great, thank you very much. So, what I want to do now, I've got 25 minutes or so. Let's get everyone from here on from there. This is not really a round table. We've been around particularly, I think, focusing on things that we might encourage each other to think differently as a result of what we've done, or things that we might encourage each other to do differently. You don't have to respond to this set of comments. We're trying to respond to your comments, but make comments. Yes, I have 1 here, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, so first.
Mine was just a clarification for Elisa. What do you mean by political agency?
Right. Well, it's the capacity of organizing and enacting change in a political way by a defined group. So the capacity of sustaining an organization and a movement over time, and the capacity of defining who's within the movement and who's outside of it, so establishing boundaries and individuating the right alliances.
And here you mean working class, or are you integrating class, which you could political? Are we talking about the bourgeois? I imagine you're not.
I wish I had an answer to this, but that's exactly the question. Or you find the right position and interlocutors to also to widen the audience of what we're talking about, to be able to communicate to a majority instead of communicating to a minority within society.
Can I add just one very small? This was a very important thing. I think we should add also the junction concern with sort of geographic variation. It's not the same everywhere. Like these alliances, these political movements would not be the same in England, sort of post-Brexit England with Ecuador or somewhere else where NGOs have a much different role in the global south and the global north. This is a crucial, I think, issue.
Okay, so a couple of things. Firstly, in response to how can academics and activists come together, my observation from this conference and also generally is that academics need to start speaking in plain English or plain in ordinary language that ordinary people can understand. Because without that, people don't have the patience to sit there and try to figure out what the point is in 50 pages of text. So that's the first thing. Second thing, there was a question here about, mining and regulation. And I never got to do 2/3 of my presentation where I come onto the tangible application of rights of nature in society. And in there I was going to walk through our current structure of environmental law and how it exacerbates, in fact it's a servant of the neoliberal agenda. It's the structure of law that we're using. It carves out a certain amount of protections in a piecemeal way that is not in alignment with how ecosystems operate. And it does it in a way that doesn't interfere with the fundamental alignment of the way the economic system operates. So with rights of nature, what we're doing is we're introducing a new legal entity, which are ecosystems and species themselves. So on the land, it comes together with trees, animals, plants that are legal entities equal to corporations. See, so it's a counterbalance to corporate rights. And this hasn't been done in our legal system. It would put a real spanner in the works of the whole neoliberal agenda. It wouldn't work anymore. So I wanted to mention that because also there are countries that have started to implement these laws, most notably Bolivia, which has also integrated it into an economic framework. Also, over 36 municipalities in the United States, including Santa Monica, which recognizes legal personality for ecosystems and species, the rights of people to the healthy environment coupled with that as part and parcel of it, and also the right to defend the rights of ecosystems, which we currently don't have, and lastly, the subordination of corporate rights to the rights of ecosystems and the rights of people. So this is real, it's a real transformational shift, and it's just a first step to moving towards a structure of law that aligns with how ecosystems operate. So it's a whole new framing for environmental law. So if there's going to be a write-up, I don't want it to end at the rights of nature is philosophical, but please allow me to submit a paper.
Well, thank you very much. Good. I'm just noticing the clock. We're at 4 now. We've got 20 minutes. Let's all be as brisk as we can. I think the third one was you.
I think
I'm
there
losing
is
it now.
someone before me.
Maybe it was Les first. But Les, why don't you go?
Very, very quickly, on the issue of is there such a thing as a good mega project? Firstly, in the early days of HS2, us community opposition groups that had formed up and down the line had a meeting with HS2's chief engineer. And we were all telling him how HS2 would be very, very different from what he had in mind if we were in charge of it. To which he said, look, you lot, this is not a community-based railway. This is not a community-designed railway. And of course he's quite right, but I think it stimulated me to think, but could there be such a thing as a community-designed high-speed railway? And if so, what would it look like and how would it be managed? And I think we need to think through that sort of thing. And then related to that, in Venezuela, there is a mega project called Ciudad Guayana, which is a huge development pole in the underdeveloped part of Venezuela, based around aluminium smelting and so on, a new town. And the principle of it was that although the core of that development was concentrated, there should be mechanisms to spread out the nature of development and the social benefits of development across the wider area. So it led me to wonder, okay, if mega projects are by their nature a feature of a profoundly unequal form of development, may there not be ways of integrating what sometimes it may inevitably be very large-scale forms of development within a more egalitarian, more just, broader framework.
Thank you. On a day when the electorate of Britain has decided it doesn't want to be a member of one community and presumably thinks it knows where the one it prefers exists.
Yeah, just briefly. I'm dealing with environmental law. I couldn't be here yesterday, but there is a reason. I was at a huge conference of environmental lawyers, which was a World Congress in Oslo, and we launched a new initiative about revising environmental law along the line of what we try to call ecological law. We want to launch the legal lines. And this is related to what you're doing here. And I briefly want to explain that I became convinced in recent years through a lot of studies with some colleagues that there is an inherent problem with environmental regulation as well as with the environmental deregulation that we have seen in recent years. And it's very much related to the fact that environmental law has been considered an instrument to promote the traditional growth economic model and the neoliberal agenda. Because it's just looking at fixing externalities insofar they create emergencies. And it's just, go on with the business as usual. When there is an emergency, we will fix it. This is the message. And the deregulation and the carbon, all the carbon trade that I've been studying a lot and the payment for ecosystem services, it just goes in the same direction. So I think the only way is to completely change the aim of environmental law. That's why I think we also need another name. Personally, I would like ecological law. I'm trying to do that with some colleagues. It should be, the main aim should be protection of ecosystem, health and integrity of ecosystem. And if you do that, if you change the aim, also you can make the instruments meaningful. Because now we have a lot of wonderful legal instruments. For example, take environmental impact assessment, which you can find in all jurisdictions around the world. But it's just a tick-the-box exercise in most jurisdictions. I mean, nobody cares about the protection of the ecological system. And this is the way why we are witnessing a use of environmental law which is not useful for the environment and for the ecosystem protection. So I think that, and that's why I very much agree, academics should become, in line with activists and with people from other disciplines. We need interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary work, much more than we have been doing so far. And we need a completely different way of looking at things. And I wanted to bring the question here because I think if there are people interested in that, you might come to me and we're trying to create a big alliance on that. It should be a global movement.
Thank you very much. Very good.
Your conference, one of its aims was to get together activists and academics. Now I've heard much about what you have found in the case studies and how this illustrates aspects of theory, but I haven't heard much about what you have learned about your relationships to political action. I've had a responsibility to engage with your conference, but I'm not sure how to characterize what your responsibilities were. And I'd like to suggest that you, in your book and in your e-book and in your journal, you should address this question of the relationship between academics and activists in some form. And this will not be a new discussion. I'm sure there are versions in sociological literature, for instance, but I'm sure that this needs to be relearned for every generation of academics and activists. So some of the things that I feel I've heard over time is the relationships that you could characterize as exploitative, where you take from my hidden labor, as I've learned to call it, from the actions that I take, and you don't engage with me at all, you just take from me. And it's my labor you're taking from. I should be campaigning today on HS2 in relation to the referendum, and I'm not. I'm here with your conference, so you owe me something, as it were. You owe my action something. So there's that exploitative one. Then there's an uneven one. I'm the case study for your PhD. And this is the utilitarian position I've heard. You use me, I use you. And then there's the social democratic one. You will tell me where my action is going wrong and how to improve its analysis. I listen, but the best I can do is to try and make sense of your theories in 10-minute presentations and use them completely eclectically to have a political intention, so that I can convince government I know what I'm talking about, and hey, this is hidden labor, So that's also an alienated position. So I think there are very much more positive relationships, and Eleanor pointed to much more progressive ones, and I feel that your publications should make reference to that and relearn those positions.
That's very good. Thank you very much indeed. And that's a very good area to be in. Do you have a comment responding to that?
Yeah, actually I do, because I think a couple of things that some of the things that we, at least I have in the work that I do, is that I actually learn as much from the groups that I work with as they might learn from me. It really, the idea of the co-production of knowledge for me is a reality. The folks that I work with in the platform teach me so much about the river and how it works, and they just know so much on every level, scientifically, hierologically, technically, socially, politically. There's so much more than I am. So the idea of transdisciplinary work, truly transdisciplinary, the fact that knowledge is not in academia at all, and I share that co-produce. For me, it's a reality. I think you raised some really important points, and it's right. And one thing that you said that I think you mentioned too, and it's really important, I think the theory that gets produced by a lot of, I'm just kind of a quasi-academic, I'm kind of in the middle, so I don't know, how to call myself, but the theory that gets produced is powerful. It is powerful. It has helped me understand the processes and hands in the struggles that I'm involved with personally on the ground. But God, the language is so freaking complicated that it takes a lot of time to understand what it is that you're trying to say, or what you're trying to say, because at the end, I end up writing the articles to get published into your forum using the same jargon that everybody else uses. And if we really truly believe that we have to be, that we have to be transdisciplinary, is a horrible word, so I'm going to use that we really collaboratively have to work to solve problems that we care about, which is what we're talking about here. Problems in our landscapes, in our areas, in our territories, in our towns that we care about, not as citizens that live where we live. We need to develop a language that we understand. And I think that for me is one of the biggest, when I started reading and working a lot of the theoretical, really powerful work that gets done, it just took me really long time to understand what the heck was trying to be said. And that is, I think, a huge challenge. We've adopted the post-structuralist language, which I know is powerful, but man, it's changing.
Yeah.
Changing the language I understand.
Danny, you want to say something?
I won't do anything.
Danny, you want to say
Just
something?
to follow up on what you said about the relationship between activism and academia, because I think it's incredibly clear how, and I can see this being taken up in the writing of the editorial. And what's particularly helpful about it is the way you break it down into the different forms of relationship that could exist, exploitative or complementary or constructive. And for that, I love it. And what makes people also terribly wary is if one was to require of these relationships that they had to be on a sort of individual one-to-one basis. So if I do this hidden labour for you, then you have to do something back for me. Whereas if people are performing labour which will benefit to some sort of project, then it will have other benefits to a broader community. So what I learned from this conference may actually probably benefit you nothing, but the NGO whose board I serve on may benefit in other ways. The students who I teach, the colleagues who I work with, the networks I'm involved in Sheffield, that's where the benefit lies. If we go down this, if I do this for you, what do you know back for me? It becomes individualised like that. Then
you have a market, which is very efficient.
Well,
Yeah, you want to say something?
yes, I would say it's like my conclusion from this conference, but I can say it now. When we were organizing this with Jose, we had this difficulty, so we were trying to think we need people there that they're actually doing something relevant to this conference. So we don't just want people to come and say their story, their case study, their PhD, and in the end say, okay, there was a case study there with activists and we know about it. So this wasn't easy. And we keep receiving emails from people saying, yes, I'm doing something relevant, but actually it wasn't relevant. So what I want to say here, and this maybe also includes myself, is that I found this really difficult actually. It's not easy what Nadine said before. Because if you're actually involved in a struggle, I have been involved in many struggles in Greece, I've never written about those struggles. Because I was thinking that it's not good to use those struggles in order to have scientific publications. So what I want to say here is that I don't think it's so easy. It's not just a matter of language. I was last year in the Center for Place, Culture and Politics in City University of New York, visiting there for 2 months. So in every panel, every discussion, there were activists and scholars, but there were people that they knew each other. So the previous day they were together in the struggle. They were not just meeting there in order to show to us that we are an institution here which is radical or critical or whatever. So, and I'm finishing with that. I think this is what we're missing. There have been many times in history, I mean, I have in mind the revolution of 1917, when people were reading Lenin and they were very happy because it helped them understand what was happening. And it was Lenin, I mean, I don't know how many people are reading today, and it's not difficult actually, you can understand it. And he's one of the biggest theorists of all So what I want to say is that I need that we need something beyond publications, beyond special issues, or we have to do it, of course. Otherwise, we will have serious problems. I mean, we need actual involvement in real struggles, and this requires from us much more than using case studies from what is happening around us and whatever. And I think this is the real challenge, actually.
Okay,
Both of your comments made me think immediately of the way that geographers in the 1980s started doing participatory community mapping, taking the sort of academic and arcane technology and sort of highly specialized technology of mapping and bringing it to communities and saying, tell us what is important about your place, and actually then put the sort of technology of making the map in the hands of communities. And I was thinking, okay, why can't we do the same thing with assessment metrics, right? If they get to multiply 10 times blue, we get to multiply like social justice times living wage, and come up with a metric. Why not, right? I mean, is that not kind of the same maneuver to take, something that is scientized, depoliticized, arcane, and say, look, it's just a set of questions to which you attach numbers, and you come up with a number, and that can fill a very, it can be a way of, in the 80s it would have said counter mapping, produce a counter map, produce a counter metric. And if you produce a counter metric with everybody along the S2 line, you come up with a number, and then you get to have an argument about which number is real. And in the end, you won't maybe win or lose in a particular battle, but it's an interesting way of bringing it to the site of struggle.
Amon, you want to say something about your experiences at sort of being, you write radically about these issues, and yet you were regarded as someone whose knowledge about offsetting, for example, is such that you were asked to advise on the processes that you said a little bit about that, but I mean, that's a form of engagement which is perhaps less, feels less comfortable than knowing that you're outside.
It does feel less comfortable, but for example, I mean, having committed this, I've been asked to write a letter of advising the court on a mining permit in northern Minnesota, and since I know the regulations that govern the mine, because I helped write them, I know exactly what the mine is required to do, and I can see exactly where they're not doing it. And actually, in creating that advice document, I can then create a document that says, hey, other similar cases, very rarely do the permittees apply all, are required to do everything, are doing everything they're required to do. Here's what to look for. And here's, and then we had that to a bunch of environmental lawyers who were in shoestring operations, and it's not academic. But it's a very satisfying way of working within policy.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's
it's a radical pretending to be a bureaucrat or a bureaucrat doing it.
It's connected actually with what you told us. For me, it was a very good point to be raised. And it's more for us to think, I just felt this, the lack of this kind of reflection. One thing is, I think it's very difficult for us, for example, to try to find some answers, for example, with talking about ecosystem services and everything, because we have a lack between academia and the territories that are living. So, for example, in Brazil, we have a community that just said no to a big RED project because they asked indigenous, they are Munduruku, indigenous people in the center of Brazilian Amazon, at the beginning of Amazon. And they just asked the people in this kind of terrible negotiations between Google and them. And they asked are we going to be able to buy our demarcation of our territory with these things that we are going to, these billions that we are going to receive? They said no, but they said, no, but the thing is, our problem is our land rights. If we cannot buy it, so we don't need this RED project. So some things, but it's, for example, it's very difficult to find information about this case because of this kind of lack that we live. And another thing that I would say is it's very difficult because, for example, we are very good on news, and I'm including myself, a lot of academic references when we say that I have very different Marxist theories and everything. But when we talk about the production of knowledge in the territories, sometimes when we do this kind of quotation or reference, we miss some things. So, for example, in the case of the concept of justice, in Latin America we are discussing different ways of approaching justice, social and environmental justice. So we have like gender approaches that are very connected to the criticism of racism, neocolonialism, and these things, for example, we didn't have the chance to discuss because we have lots of things in common here, and these discussions were not present. So, like when we take these references, I think it's very important. Someone said about the right to the city, which kind of right to the city, in which approach, and we have to be very careful because sometimes we are just continuing the cycle of appropriation of knowledge, and the territory is seen like the space of the experience and not the production of knowledge itself, and that's something that I would like to
Good, thank you. Can we go back to the new question? Yeah, sorry, I'm lost. The back row is sort of lost in the mist.
So this was on the line of what Madeleine and Julia and Nadia were saying, so maybe I'm a little bit late to the discussion. But well, first of all, I'd like to say that opposite to Madeleine, I do Leach academics work all the time. Working with GMOs, it's what I do every day. But anyway, maybe what we were talking about, a point that has been raised several times is this thing about the complicated language being used and things that cannot be understood by everyone. And I think this is a normal thing, given that in academics you need to be building on previous people's works, so you have an increasing complexity in your work that requires, obviously, increasingly complex language. But the thing is that probably the people that are fighting on the ground won't be using these very complicated concepts on a regular basis, and maybe will be using some things that are so 17th century to you. You know, like the things that you said that people were using concepts that were from Lenin, I think, and they were using them now. You probably have learned during your training things that are now considered not on the front line, but that would probably be useful for the people that are trying to find things on the ground now. Do you understand what I mean? Maybe we don't need the complex things, but the simple things, and we don't have access to the simple things because of the people that wrote them are dead now, and they're not here to explain them to us. But you could be those translators if you wanted to. That was it.
Thank you very much.
I also wanted to. I wanted to thank you for your point, and I wanted to say something because I think your point was also related to our activity as researchers, and something what we have not acknowledged, and I don't know if it's a taboo or whatever, is that it's our work. Research is our work, and we are also workers, and we have to acknowledge also. I don't know, in my case, I acknowledge the structures in which I did my research, and I'm a person who needs to work to survive, and I chose to do research. At the same time, I don't like this division of academic and activist. To me, science is a political terrain, and I think if you use your social science, science is not just natural sciences. It's us, It's and then I also go to the street, and I try to, everywhere where I live, in the different places where I live, I try to engage with the politics. But the question to me is, I don't know if I don't know what I don't want to be personal or whatever, but if some people live only from activism, you know, I cannot live only from activism, or at least in my country it's not possible. So I need to earn my life. I did my research in Senegal. I lived before my PhD there, and to me it was a way of exposing the problems that are there. And I would like to do something, and perhaps one day or sooner or later I will ask for help. But sometimes I think I'm afraid of being invasive because, you know, I want to help them. They have so many problems, but at the same time I think I want to do something, but how? I think it's a matter of talking to us and having the willingness to do something. And something I also wanted to say, and it's also related to what you have been saying, and Nuria, and I think, yes, it's really possible, and I think I try to do it, and many others I think also may try to do so, just talking to friends, and you know, Marx theory, you know, communism or anarchism is something really simple, and it's just a moral issue, you know, or moral, or use the word that you want. It's not about something really complicated. It's about your own everyday life. It's about health, you know, the air we breathe, our time. I'm not going to extend myself, but just I think we can talk to family and friends, and we can be useful in that way. It doesn't, but doesn't mean that we cannot do big things at the same time. But let us not feel useless because we don't do these things.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all of you. We are effectively out of time, and there's a tradition with meetings, which is that the best session is the one that's truncated by the closure. And thank you very much for igniting the final session and for giving us a lot to think about. I really enjoyed the few days. I was sitting in that corner with this very forbidding light. From here he looks merely sort of severe. If you're sitting there, there's a lift to the left eyebrow that says, is that the best you can do? Actually, I felt quite impressed by that last year, or challenged by that. I think in a sense that's the challenge we should take away. You know, some fantastic talks, great conversation. And I think that's the, you know, is that the best we can do? There has to be more. We are very sure.
I was going to say a request for next year to have more discussion, more interaction, and less plenary.
So, thank you. Before I do a break, I would like to do one more thing, which is to thank Elia and Jose for organising this. And indeed, please sort of like them to do it again if they feel like it. Fantastic today. A round of applause. You have about 1 minute and a half.
No, well, I was just going to say thank you to everybody for being here. It was a really interesting couple of days, and we do hope that someone will take this as just the first of these kinds of events and replicate this in the future. It doesn't mean that we're going to replicate it again. We need a decade. Please feel free to replicate this in the future. And you will see them.
No, thank you. I mean, thank you a lot for being here. I know that it was difficult for everybody to find a place in this conference, but I'm happy that it worked well. I mean, I feel so. I hope that this is how you feel. And definitely, on what Jose said, I think we need more events like that. And not only like that, maybe even daily events. I mean, we should engage more with activists and make our work more relevant on a daily basis, not only in conferences or in order to take a ground or whatever. This is not the point. For sure, this is not the point. So thank you again. We hope you enjoyed the discussions.
Last point. Thank you.